Oh no, Blanche wants to witter on about arty stuff, and I've got to listen. You know what this means, don't you? It's going into the hippie garden in the basement of Games Workshop's Dark Tower. The scenery's colourful enough, pots of acrylics arranged like flower beds from one end of the room to the other. Hippies like sunflowers wavering in the breeze, otherwise known as Sid's incessant whinging, Tony Ackland's pet beast of Nurgle sniffing around the coffee pond at the far end. Oh, that was Tony Ackland. And to top it off, the whole floor's carpeted by H's hair. You've got to be careful of that. Dave Andrews' beard is loose in there somewhere. A leather-clad arm grabs me by the throat and drags me off into the cave at the side. What have we got here then, eh? It's me, John. Oh, come here. The void black figure slopes over to a table and points a stubby finger, one of his own I think, at the tiny form of an Ironclaw space pirate. I nod and smile nervously, hoping he's eaten. A few grunts later, and it's obvious this is the subject for Suzuki Riding Guru's latest adventure. John looks around nervously. I hope he finds Dave's beard before it finds us. Somebody suggested Priestley wanted to capture it alive and write rules for it, but it wasn't me. Right then, says the man. Clean up the figure. We've covered this sort of stuff before. You want to get rid of mould lines, flash, and anything else that shouldn't be there. You get it? Files and stuff are useful here. Mind you, I come from the minimalist school of miniature modelling. Hey? Scalpel only. Always use a new blade. He brandishes the tiny surgical instrument and grins. But I wouldn't recommend that to anyone else. Why? For a second I think my red pen's exploded. Then the message sinks in. John looks pretty funny when he's sucking what's left of his digits. He soon recovers. Right, ask yourself if you're satisfied with the figure. No, we're not doing a major conversion here, but there are little touches that you can add to give a figure some individuality. Check the animation. Is the head in an interesting enough position, or the arms, or the legs? The best way to alter any of these, should you want to, is to get some pliers, wrap the limb or area in tissue paper to protect it, and apply gentle but firm pressure to move the area into the new position. Always try to bend the metal from a natural joint. Remember that people have bones and can't use their legs or arms like tentacles. There's an eerie moan from the other room. Sorry, Tony, most people can't anyway. Then there's subtle stuff you can do. A pin can be useful for flaring the nostrils. Of the figure, that is. The same process makes a gun barrel look more realistic. While we're on the subject, surface detail can work two ways. If your figure is covered in surface detail, it's easy to paint up. Sometimes, though, it's nice to clean most of this stuff off and leave yourself a smooth painting surface. That way, it's all down to the detail you paint on with the brush. That can be a little more delicate than anything done in the casting process. Exercise your skills. Sharpening up edges with the scalpel also helps accentuate detail. Shoulder pads, for example, sometimes look rounded off, but the figure looks more dramatic if they come to a fine edge. Armour and weapon blades benefit from the same treatment. Incidentally, after being sharpened up, blades look quite effective if you only give them a varnish. It makes them look really shiny. Very clever. Don't be sarcastic. Having stripped off a load of detail and altered the figure, you can now start to consider adding bits. Don't worry, it's all in the name of individuality. Your spares box is the obvious place to look for ideas. Extra weapons, pouches and stuff like that. But with a little milliput and a bit of patience, you can add moustaches or beards, tongues, preferably only one, eye patches and so on. Clipped pins can make good arrows stuck into shields or armour. Drill a hole in the part that will receive the pin and then superglue the two components together. Look, isn't this all getting a bit unwieldy? Good point, don't overdo it. A couple of choice effects will do the trick. Now then, yes, spikes and tusks, and horns. Milliput? No, Milliput isn't the ideal thing for these. Go to the spares box and grab a couple of old spear hafts or something similar. A carefully whittled half will come to a really fine point. Cut it to the length required and fix it into a drilled hole on the figure. Superglue will bond the resulting join strongly enough. That gives you a decent horn. Spikes can be created by adding the clipped end of a pin to the figure in the same way. Be very careful when you're clipping pins though, there can be some shrapnel, so make sure your eyes are protected. The metal spike should also be strong enough to take a little bending, if you want. It adds character. Shoulder armour is a good place to add stuff like this. If you want an interesting shield pattern, get an old figure, one with a good facial expression, and cut its head off. File the back of the head carefully. Take your time and you end up with just the casting of the face. This can be glued onto a fighter's shield and looks really special. If your figure has a bow, you can add string with fine fuse wire, cotton, human hair, or stretched plastic sprue. Most of these can be superglued. If the bow-armed figure is orcish or something similar, crude knots at both ends of the bowstring are effective additions. The only technique required for these is a little patience. And finally, a couple of favourite esoteric touches here. Nose and earrings can be created by getting fine fuse wire, bending it around a paintbrush handle and clipping it off. Superglue in the required position for a nice gothic effect. Spittle and gore add a touch of horror. Polystyrene cement after the figure has been painted looks wonderfully disgusting. Add a little light green to the glue for a phlegmy effect. Trish Morrison's favourite gore manufacturing process involves mixing some red or yellow, depending on her mood, to clear nail varnish. The pus-coloured guns you get can be added to wounds made by cutting into the figure with a scalpel. Especially suitable for nasty monsters. It's art, man. There's a sudden burst of rapturous applause from the next room. John and I venture over and peer around the doorway. The hippies are all jumping up and down, whooping a lot. Mike McVeigh has Dave's beard impaled on his 00 brush. There will be a feast tonight. Bases, cries John. He snatches the still twitching clump of hair. That's going in my spares box. Bases? Rickenbacker 4001 stereos? Fender Jazz? We wander back to the desk. Yeah, bases, he says, throttling Dave's faithful parasite. There are two main types, artificial and modelled. The artificial type involves things like building milliput mushrooms and toadstools, adding details like small animals from your spares box, whatever takes your fancy. Small puddles can be made in any suitably modelled crevice on the base by pouring in a suitable amount of PVA and leaving it to dry. He stares longingly at the furry clump. And the model type? What? Oh yes, well that's a lot more fun. A basic flock covering can be complemented with soil, grit, pebbles, twigs, moss and the like. But a wander in the woods can prove fruitful in your search for interesting items. A careful search can reveal shrew skulls and other small mammal bones that take on a whole new perspective when you put them next to a metal miniature. If you're really ambitious and don't mind getting your fingers dirty, the droppings of several predatory species can be broken down to reveal insect carapaces and all sorts of other goodies. All this is making me hungry. With a single gulp, John's cavernous mouth envelops the recently deceased beard creature. You're sick. Nah, it's all biodegradable, and the results are worth the effort. Just remember to wash your hands after mucking around. Now then, have we covered everything? Just about. You mentioned sticking lots of bits together. What about drying times? Well, he muses, picking his teeth with his multi-purpose modelling tool, Milliput takes a few hours, but you're going to have to leave the whole thing for a day before undercoating anyway, because the various glues and putty are still drying underneath. Paint over them at this stage and the undercoat will crack. Have we got space to talk about undercoating? We sure have, but hasn't this been covered already? Basically, but there are some important notes. Decide what you're going to leave bare, sword blades and so on. Then the best undercoat usually comes from thinned enamel. Acrylic may shrink when thinned. Apply it rigorously with an old brush, working the paint into the detail without giving it a chance to build up in crevices. That just results in detail being obscured and an uneven drying time for the undercoat itself. Leave the model for a couple of hours to dry. You can speed this up by placing the model on a radiator, putting it under a hairdryer, or just holding it in front of Sid's mouth while he whinges. A thicker undercoat is useful on areas of bad modelling, where there may be fine cracks, or plain surfaces. The thicker coat makes a smoother, better painting surface. Now there is a danger of an undercoat that's too thin. This should be avoided. Later coats of paint will adhere properly to the model, but the colours will be dulled. Having said that, I always leave chainmail bare to avoid destroying all that lovely texture. Now then, painting the model. No, sorry, we're out of space. You can talk about that next month. Anyway, it's lunchtime. Are you coming? No thanks. I've eaten. This month's Heavy Metal was created by Emperor Blanche reanimating, Reed browbeating, Minion Masterson, and is dedicated to the memory of Dave Andrews' lamented beard. Thank you very much for watching. If you'd like to support the channel, then please be sure to like and subscribe, or even leave a comment. I always try my best to reply to them all. You can even now support the channel by joining the Patreon page, details of which are in the description below. Thank you again for watching, and always remember to drill your barrels.